Every community has a legacy, but not every legacy survives. Here on the west side of Ann Arbor, Black people didn't just live, they built, they thrived, they left a mark on the city. But they didn't just leave names to be remembered, they built something far deeper, a community that thrived against the odds, that carved out success and pride in a city that didn't always make room for them. As time passed, these stories were stripped away, block by block, and now what remains? We seek to uncover that legacy beyond the plaques and murals. This film is a journey to uncover the spirit of Ann Arbor's west side, those who created it, built it, and made it what it was. This film gives a voice to a community whose story deserves to be told in full. This is a witness to their enduring legacy. This is a testimony of their strength. This is a letter to the West Side.
They say that history repeats, but some make history delete to hide defeats, cover retreats, make sure the present never meets the past. I mean truth, ruthless behaviors of those that history calls saviors from upstaging the actual pavers. What is now the future? Savor that. What is this truth, you ask? It's the age-old question that has stumped, and I'll take a little speed bump, hear it from when you revisit that lyric. It's the age-old question that has stumped many over time. If a tree in the forest falls down and no one is around, does it still make a sound? Ground yourself in the possibility that the powers that be never wanted you to see that we were here. Not only were we here, but we were here first. At your little nest, the West was birthed from Black imaginations, pontifications, percolations, revelations, education, even segregation, that secured the darkest berry bloodline pure. You can be sure that the paternity of your city was once a beloved Black community that once did make a sound before the saviors came around or allegedly found and sequestered, settled into this best Western that was once brown spiced with flavor, favored and highly blessed. Yes, yes, they made a mess of the West. Savor that. At this allegedly silent tree that once stood so well. Do we ask why we weren't told that its space was ever held, or ask how it fell or what caused its fall? Do we care at all? No. Because history repeats. But despite efforts to delete, roses still rise from concrete. Savor that. That in the midst of silenced voices and savior-induced psychosis, we were here. And not only were we here, we are. Hear me and crystal clear it. You cannot erase spirit, it only draws you near it. Truth deliberately bears witness. We are here. Now savor that.
In search of something greater, an identity outside of bondage, many African Americans found themselves migrating to the North. Between the years of 1916 and 1970, an estimated 6 million black people found their way to the North, seeking opportunities and promises of a better life. Some did not last the journey, but for those who did, some called Ann Arbor home. They would quickly find out that life in the North offered a newer and more subtle form of systemic racism. Rather than the overt oppression they left behind, they faced more hidden barriers, such as de facto redlining, which confined black residents to specific neighborhoods. This segregation ultimately gave rise to communities like the West Side, where black families built their own enclaves in the face of exclusion.
My name is Alma Wheeler-Smith. I grew up in Ann Arbor. I grew up on what's known as the Old West Side, and I've been in Washtenaw County for 81 years. My parents came from St. Louis, Missouri, my dad, and my mom from Columbia, South Carolina. My parents met on campus in the early 30s.
Where's my family originally from? My mother's family came to Ann Arbor from Windsor, Chatham area in Canada, and Detroit. I can go back as far as 1908, my grandmother being born on Gott Street, the very same street that I live on. And my grandfather, Gilbert Pitts, his family was from Helena, Arkansas, and the St. Louis area. And they came here. I think my grandfather came here around in the late 30s or 40s. My mother was born in 1946.
Well, my dad was basically from Detroit. He was born in Windsor, Ontario, where my mother was from Ypsilanti. And of course, they married and made their union and had 5 children.
My name is Shirley Beckley, and I grew up on the north side first, and then the west side. My father's from Tupelo, Mississippi. My mother, I was told, was born in Milan.
My family came here from Connorsville, Indiana, when I was 7 years old. We moved here in September of 1941, just months before the Second World War started. Because I can remember looking out of our upstairs window and seeing a young man that had a paper and he was saying, "Extra, extra, bombs were dropped in Hawaii."
My family came from Tuscaloosa, Alabama, both my mother and my father. And I also have 5 other siblings, 3 that are still living today.
My family ended up coming to Ann Arbor because my dad went on what he called a vacation, which lasted 10 years in Atlanta. Met my mom. They had me. And then my dad's mom ended up getting sick, so he wanted to come back home. And my mom followed him up here. She preferred to raise me and my older brother in Ann Arbor versus Southwest Atlanta. Better circumstances, better schools, better situations, so ended up staying here.
I'm just not sure that everybody knew that in Ann Arbor, because we were so close, our west side was so close to the railroad, we had a lot of housing that was used for underground railroads. In fact, a friend of mine rented a house and I was in it a lot. And it was a lovely home because it was a big house and they were able to hide people real well. And because the train station was so close, they could also know the schedules and know when to get people ready to move on so that they could get them to Canada. So that was always, I think, a wonderful part of our history.
You know, I have no idea what my parents' expectation of life in Ann Arbor was. I know what they encountered. The university did not provide housing for its black students. So they were directed to certain houses in the city that the university had, I won't say closely vetted, but the university was aware of people who had rooms available for the black students, and they directed them to those homes. I think my dad and mom, when they were married early, were on 4th Avenue, could have been 5th, living with Mrs. Jones. So you probably heard of Mrs. Jones from some of the other people here. And then as kids came along, they moved to Brown Street, which is very close to the Michigan Stadium, and had a little house there with little kids.
So they came here because there was work for women. My mother told me that she was one of the women that worked in the bomber plant where they made the planes. That was one of her jobs before she started cleaning and cooking. I don't know what happened. In my research, I found out that they didn't want very many black people working in the bomber plant. They were told that black women could get jobs here. So my mother said that's what her and her cousins came here. Now, they were in Milan, and then they went to Ypsilanti. At that time, she would take the Greyhound. She and my cousins would take the Greyhound into Ann Arbor, and then they would walk to wherever they were gonna work. So my mother decided she would save up some money and try to buy a house. At this time, I lived on the north side over on Wall Street. So she bought the house over on 115 West Kingsley, which now is a high-rise condominium.
My father's father, Samuel Buck Malcolm, as we know him, he was coming from rural Georgia at a time where there was a massacre in Walton County called the Morris Ford Bridge Massacre. And it was said to be a relative of ours. And they were looking for anybody with the last name Malcolm at the time, back in 1946. He came here by way of his cousins, opening the door and opening opportunities for him to come here and work. And he was a young man, about 18 years old. He came here with little education, very little money. And when he got here, he had the promise of work and prosperity, basically, to grow as a man and start a family and be able to take care of his family. My grandmother came here as a little girl and contributed to the community by way of being a very good cook in many of the restaurants around here in the community center. She was known for feeding people, so she fattened a lot of people up in the community.
When my family arrived to Ann Arbor, I know specifically on my dad's side, my great-grandfather was running from something in Georgia, and he came here, registered his last name with the county clerk, and they changed his last name. They changed the spelling in our last name. It was originally spelled without a L, and the county clerk said that he was a black man and he didn't know what he was talking about, so they changed the spelling of our name. And that was the first encounter of Ann Arbor for my great-grandfather.
My family moved to Ann Arbor because all their family members were moving here because of the availability of jobs and not having to work in the fields anymore. When my family moved here, we moved into the Seeley house, which was like a transient house, and we had an apartment, and there was 3 of us that lived there at one time, my mother, father, and it was like a little 2-bedroom apartment. And so when people would transition from the South, there were all these apartment complexes that were set up for them to lodge in.
My family moved to the west side mainly because of my dad. But this is where he was from. All his family and friends were here, so he decided to bring my mom and myself and my older brother here to live.
Ann Arbor had the University of Michigan here. There were booming businesses. People were coming up from the South. There was a lot of construction. A lot of the older black people that came here became construction laborers. They contributed to the building of Ann Arbor. This university, all of the hospitals you see around here, all of the schools, the roads, they were builders, and they contributed a great deal to the growth of Ann Arbor.
If you would call the West Side where predominantly the African American community was, it would go from on the east, it would go from approximately Division Street to Brook Street, and from Catherine Street to Depot. Now, what encompassed in that area, I'll give you some other streets, would be Broadway, Wall Street, Moore Street, Fifth Ave, Detroit Street, Kingsley, Felch, Summit, Hiscock, Daniels, Spring, Fountain, and Miller, as well as Ann Street, which I think covers the vast majority of where most of the black community lived. Maiden Lane would be included in that, but there were a few houses on Maiden Lane. All of them were black or Mexican people who lived there. And Main Street itself, from north of Huron. And of course, Maine was US 23 business back in the day. That was way before M14, way before I-94 was built to bypass the city.
I was in a place where we knew all the African Americans were in one area at the time, primarily in one area, because we found out later on that the realtors had gotten together and made a plan that they would only allow African Americans to rent or buy in the area that's West Side. We knew what it was, and some people were able to get around it because they had white employers, and they sometimes would take a step, buy the house, and then give it to their employee. I knew several families that worked that way, and they would give them a little bit of a down payment. One of the families that became very well known in this area, he told me that the guy who was the barber had made good money, would loan other African Americans the down payments on houses, but sometimes they'd have to put a front up like it was really going to be sold to a non-black person. And that worked really pretty well because we were able to get into pretty good housing.
The neighborhood in which I grew up in, on this side of town, the West Side, was predominantly black. You had to go 4 or 5 blocks before you seen a white person. Since then, everything has changed. Now very rarely do you see a black family on the West Side. So regentrification did come into play.
Well, the home we finally landed in and grew up in was on 8th Street. It was very close to an elementary school. When they went to buy the house, they couldn't get a loan from any of the banks in the city because there was a red line, and they had to borrow money from my mom's mother, so my maternal grandmother, and they bought the house outright. It was unusual for any white family to want to sell to a black family, but the owners did, and the neighborhood was a little careful, but not hostile, not openly hostile.
And then, of course, we had the Dunbar Center, which was right down the street the other way on 4th Avenue. And I spent a lot of time there because they had cooking classes, and you could study after school, and there would be extracurricular things to do. Like we had several choirs there. We had trios. I sang with a trio almost all my growing up years because the Dunbar Center offered dance classes and things that made you really feel a part of the community.
But I grew up down by the train tracks, hanging out with the hobos, because I used to fish, and that was right down by where they were at. And then you're talking about the junkyard and the slaughterhouse. We used to come down that back strip where all the $1 million condos are now, had a 2x10, and we'd put it on the roof of the slaughterhouse, walk across it, go across the roof, and watch the pigs come off the trucks.
Growing up as a young man, I had a large view of what a man was supposed to be and what family was like. We stuck together, couldn't get away with much. Before I could get home, my mom knew everything that I was doing because she had 3 or 4 phone calls telling her that I was somewhere where I wasn't supposed to be. I was pretty lucky to have my grandparents in the same neighborhood as me, so I could go to the back porch. My grandmother kept a jar of coins on the back porch for me, so if I wanted to go swimming in the summertime, I could do that. I had a freezer on her back porch with popsicles and little knickknacks while they were all at work, and we were enjoying the summer. And I was blessed to be able to have so many people in my life to guide me in that neighborhood.
If I was doing something wrong, Russ Calvert, come here, boy. Or one of the other older ladies, come here, boy. You Laura Mae's son, aren't you? Well, you get on home. I'm gonna tell her. Because back then, telephones weren't like you have now today. You got a cell phone. Back in the day, if one person on the block had a phone, everybody on the block had a phone. If one person had a TV, everybody had a TV till they could get them a TV.
And this west side here was a part of a community that everyone knew each other. We didn't have to worry about locking our doors. Everybody knew the neighbors, and we all looked out for one another. Anytime somebody went on a vacation, the neighbors took care of the house, took care of the plants, took care of the animals when we were gone, and we done the same for them. When they went on vacation, we took care of their things. So, and I really miss it. I miss that, like now, today, I love my neighbors, but do they love me? Do they show that same love? And that's just missing in a lot of neighborhoods. You live so close to each other for years and not even know who they are, don't even know their name.
When I was in the 12th grade, I got a job at Jacobson's. Now, I couldn't be a sales lady. I had to work back in the stockroom. So I kept telling the manager of Jacobson's that I thought that he was being discriminatory because he didn't have any black salespeople. And what would tick me off is when they were short or somebody didn't come in, they would pull me from the stockroom and have me sell things on the floor, but I couldn't be a sales lady. So I raised so much Cain with him. He didn't let me be a sales lady, but they had operators back then. We had operators where you plugged in cords way back then. And so I was the Jacobson's operator. That was supposed to shut me up.
Me and my friends, man, we just were outside. We played football. We went to the Indian trails in West Park looking for arrowheads, and we went ice skating. I didn't do too much ice skating, but I would slide across the ice at West Park. We had a lot of after-school programs back then where after school you could go and do crafts. Mac Pool was open in the summertime, so we went swimming every day. We rode bikes all through the neighborhood, man. You could always go on any street in the neighborhood and find a pickup football game. You could go to what's now known as Wheeler Park. We called it Summit Park back in the day. Play some basketball, man. And there was an old store owned by a man named Mr. McCoy next to the community center, man. We go down there and get lemon heads and Boston baked beans and now and laters and chips and you know, we save our little coins up, man. Make sure we go to Mr. McCoy's after school and get the candy and hey, hit the park. You know, ride our bikes, try and do wheelies and impress the girls. We did all kinds of stuff, man.
Growing up on the West Side was awesome. You know, mostly black community, but by the time I got there, there was a good amount of white families. I had a good amount of white neighbors, but all super friendly, very loving community, very loving neighborhood. Like I said, you could pretty much walk anywhere to get what you need. I remember walking to Zingerman's. I remember walking to DeLong's. Remember walking to what now is Carytown. I know when a lot of the people in our community in the documentary grew up, there was no, Carytown didn't exist, but it was there when I was a kid. So I remember walking to Carytown. But yeah, it was great. This was my dad's community, my dad's neighborhood, and soon became my mom's.
Growing up on the West Side as a kid, it was all about community. We lived next door to Rosie Seed, and I just remember as a kid, we would be playing, and we would look over, and she'd be perched in her windowsill, and we would wave at her, or we'd go talk to her over the fence. People were always looking out for us. We could ride up and down the street, and our parents wouldn't have a worry because we were safe. Yeah, it was very heavy on the community, and just we had some awesome pillars that I got to grow up with.
My parents were very active in civil rights, so the schools that we attended were not in the Ann Arbor public school system. They were very concerned that their kids would be treated unfairly because of their efforts to integrate the schools in Ann Arbor and to work for change. So they enrolled us in St. Thomas, which was located on Kingsley. And we spent our elementary and high school years in St. Thomas High Elementary and then high school.
Well, Mac School and Jones School are very, very prominent in my lifetime. I did not attend Jones School. I'm a little too young for that. But my grandfather, Gilbert Pitts, one of the first group of black employees for the Ann Arbor Public Schools, was the custodian at Jones School. And I believe that they're putting a marker there for him here sometime soon. But he was not only a custodian, he was a mentor, he was an advisor, he was a guide to the students, he was a guide to a lot of kids in the community, and he was well respected there. So Jones School, my mom went there before going to Mac, and so it comes full circle that Jones School became community, and my youngest daughter actually graduated from community. So that school has been in my life my entire life. And then moving over to Mac School, I attended Mac School. My wife attended Mac School. My mom and dad attended Mac School after Jones School was closed. And it was awesome. There was a diverse atmosphere. I never felt different or, like there was any kind of racial tension or anything in those schools. Jones School was always talked about among the elders that I spoke to as one of their favorite places to be growing up in the neighborhood.
Jones School was always an integrated school. When I started kindergarten, I had, Caucasian, Mexicans, and African Americans in all my classes, and my siblings had the same thing. We had predominantly all white teachers, so the experience that really sticks home with me today was that the white teachers were quick to say, this child needs to go be in a special class or special ed class. They had first, second, and reading groups in the class. And if I was a betting man, or if you were a betting person, you could guess what the predominantly numbers were in the third reading class, because that was their way of putting their thumb kind of on our progress. Although you may have been talented enough to read in that first reading group or second reading group, they didn't want to take the time. And if you didn't have a parent that was on their game to come to the parent-teacher meetings or the interviews with the teachers, you'd just be kind of lost in the shuffle. And that happened a lot. A lot of children that went to special classes that did not need to go, but they didn't have anybody there fighting for them.
What was interesting about Mac School, Diane was my neighbor. So, and one block down was John Charles Morton. We were all good friends. So we all went to Jones School. And then for some reason, then we went to Mac School. I don't know what happened. To this day, I don't know what happened. But for some reason, the school system sent Diane and myself to Ball School. Now, we were the only blacks in the whole school. Well, no other black kids in Ball School but me and Diane. I'm a little more feisty than Diane. So when the boys would call me the N-word, I would beat them up. So I spent a lot of time in the principal's office. So the principal told my mother that he thought I needed a psychiatrist because I was always fighting. So my mother finally said to him, well, what did you do to the boy that called her the N-word? He said, well, we didn't do nothing. And she said, well, that's why I'm not getting no psychiatrist until you do something about, because she was taught that she doesn't have to accept that. And anytime somebody would call me the N-word, that was what they got, a butt whipping. But that was something that we've talked about that in our class reunions amongst ourselves, because the white kids think, oh, we just got along so well. And we did get along because they knew if you used the N-word, that was an automatic butt whip. We took the consequences. You was going to get beat up.
I went to a school in the second grade on was called Perry School, and it's still in existence. And we were about 3 or 4 African Americans there because we would have considered that a white side of town. We had people who lived in houses. We lived upstairs in the house that was close to the football stadium on Green Street. And there were about 5 or 6 black families on that street. And it was a very welcoming community. In fact, one of the gentlemen that we made friends with, my dad, had an opportunity to rent his house. And that's when we moved to the north side of town. And I started attending Jones School in the 3rd grade.
I grew up starting by going to Jones School, which was right downtown Ann Arbor. Jones School was known as the Black School in Ann Arbor. They wanted to change that, so they put us on a bus and shipped us out to Pittsfield for my first year. Then 1975, we moved over onto Elmcrest, in which I started attending Mack Elementary School. From Mack Elementary School, I went on to Forsyth Junior High School and then Pioneer High School, graduating in 1978.
When I was in elementary school, so first I started at Jack and Jill. In my kind of pre-K era in school. So then I went from kindergarten to second grade at Wines. I remember splitting time for some reason between Wines and Mack before we ended up moving out of the Old West Side. So Wines and Mack were my two elementary schools before moving further east towards Ypsi and going to Pittsfield. My early school experience was great. I remember being very diverse as far as the kids, a mix of black and white, really all races. I don't really remember the demographic too much of the teachers. I do remember having a couple black teachers as a kid going to Wines and Mack, but I don't think a lot. Like I experienced later once I got into like middle school at Scarlett and at Huron High School. But early on, I don't remember a ton of black teachers, but I remember a couple. But as far as the student population, it was very diverse.
So I attended Ann Arbor Public Schools my entire schooling career before college. They were all great schools, but I definitely experienced, your handful of racist experience or just like unsettling experiences as a kid. I remember times where my friends told me that they couldn't be friends with me because I was black, or times when I was called rude names and my teachers just told me to sit down. The schools were great, but there was a lot of, I don't know, maybe cultural training that could have been had in our schools to make sure that the black and brown students weren't forgotten.
The rooming homes were well, students had to have a place to stay, and that was really important that they had some place to stay, and that's why we had right here, Ann Henderson's mother had a rooming, rooms. A house right here on the corner of Kingsley and 4th had rooms that would rent to blacks, and that was another thing why this was predominantly black, was because the people in this area, we had a lot of Greeks that lived right here next to Carytown. Now Carytown, but back then it was Godfrey's Junkyard and Washtenaw Farm Bureau and the Farmers Market. And this was kind of a small industrial area. We had Lancey's Junkyard right at the corner of 5th and Summit. Mr. Cooper had a rooming house, and there was another lady, and I can't think of her name, but she had a rooming house who rented to the students who could not get housing here in Ann Arbor. My Uncle Bill Thomas had a rooming house on the corner of Green and Hill.
Segregation in Ann Arbor was subtle but strong. As you know, in the South there was de jure segregation by law, but in the North we had de facto segregation. It was in reality as opposed to established by codes and laws. But the realtors in the city had an agreement, and in many of the neighborhoods there were covenants that housing would not be sold to black people or any person of color, but we were it at the time. So we were redlined into those housing districts. The banks also had an agreement that they would not loan for houses that were outside of the black neighborhoods. So there was that kind of collusion, I guess is a tougher word than coordination. There was collusion between the banks and the realtors to keep the neighborhood segregated. In the businesses, we would go to Jacobson's, and I wanted to buy a hat one day, and one of the women said, well, we can't, you can buy the hat, but you can't try it on. And needless to say, Mom was furious, but One of the saleswomen came up, and she was from Russia. And she said, there is no reason they can't try on this hat. So she sort of broke that color bar unofficially. So people knew that if you wanted to buy a hat and you were going to Jacobson's, you should look for her. And she would sell you a hat and let you try it on so you could see how it looked. In the restaurants, the Black people were seated most frequently by the kitchen or by the area going into the restrooms. There was not clear and open seating. The segregation was pretty firmly established. The university had its part in making sure that their Black students went to Black housing as opposed to having a place to go in the dorms. And, it took a while to break that down.
Did we feel the segregation or the discrimination? Absolutely, without a doubt. There were restaurants in Ann Arbor that we couldn't go into. On Main Street, if you can believe it, in Ann Arbor. They didn't want to service at Kresge's or Woolworth's, even Cunningham's drugstore. My sister wrote a book on the fact that she went to Crippen's drugstore to get some ice cream. The white girl gets served with a nice little glass bowl for her ice cream, but my sister gets her ice cream in a paper cup.
Well, there were certain restaurants we couldn't go to, such as the Sugar Bowl up on Main Street, which I always thought was interesting to me because the Sugar Bowl was owned by Mr. Precates, and his daughter, Becky Precates, went to school with us, went to high school, and we were friends, but we couldn't go in their restaurant. But that was just a given. We knew where we could go and where we couldn't go. We knew what stores we could shop in. We were so protected. I think our parents just accepted it. They didn't like it, because I can remember conversations of them talking about it. We had certain places we could live because our parents would talk about it, but our parents weren't happy with it, but they were so happy that they could buy a house. And what I was going to say about Reverend Carpenter, he was very instrumental because he had friends at the bank and he would talk them into giving our parents loans so they could buy these houses, even though it was in a certain area. So they were happy to get the homes. And back then, when I think about it now, we had more people that owned homes back then than we do now.
To speak to discrimination and why the north side, west side was where it was at, because it was kind of an industrial area, like on the other side of the tracks. And it was close to the railroad tracks, right? So we even had the city who had their tire plant right across from our park at Wheeler Park. And that plant was used to take all the tire they used in the streets to fill the cracks and the voids and stuff. That's where it was cooked. And we smelled that all summer long. The city yard was on right at Main, just a little bit off of Summit. That was the old city garage and city yard. So we're on the north side, junkyard. We had a slaughterhouse right at the corner of Summit and 5th and Depot, right at the eastern edge of our park. I remember playing baseball, and some of the guys could hit so well they could hit the ball up on the roof, and we'd have to go climb up on the roof to retrieve our ball.
Over time, there has been some changes within our neighborhood on the west side. Of course, I was born in 1972, but I was very aware of the way my mom and my dad grew up in the neighborhood. There were like model cities projects that came from the federal government to help people fix their properties up and add value to them. People started to move around a little more. There was a little more diversity in the neighborhood in the 70s and the 80s, compared to what it was like in the 40s and the 50s, where black people were just basically placed and forced to be in that neighborhood.
But Ann Arbor was a beautiful place to grow up. It was tough like anything else, but we grew up in a little house. It wasn't big, but my father always said, you got a roof over your head, food on the table, and clothes on your back. They might have not been all new clothes, but we weren't homeless.
The foundation of African American culture is built on necessity. With fewer opportunities offered by society, we turn to one another. Organizations such as the NAACP, Congressional Black Caucus, HBCUs, and the Colored Welfare League were birthed out of a need for resources made by us, for us. Here in Ann Arbor, the Dunbar Community Center stood as that pillar. It was more than a gathering place. It was a place of education, service, and celebration where black families found hope and unity. The center was first introduced as the Dunbar Civic Center, founded by Reverend Ralph M. Gilbert in 1923, and named after Paul Laurence Dunbar, a prominent black poet and novelist in the late 19th and early 20th century. Its original operating place was located in a building known as the Kaiser Block, which has a rich history in and of itself. The building was purchased by the Colored Welfare League in 1921, also led by Reverend Gilbert. The funds for the purchase came from leftover money raised for send-off parties for black troops. The Kaiser Block housed various black businesses within the district and provided low-income housing to the community. In 1926, the center operated from a new location on Catherine Street. Then in 1937, the center moved into its most recognized and prominent location at 420 North 4th Avenue. As time passed, the Dunbar Center outgrew their home and shifted to the Ann Arbor Community Center in 1957, a decision intended to expand their services to include the entire community. With this came a new construction at 625 North Main Street, which still stands today. During this time, de facto segregation encompassed the housing market, businesses, and schools. Education was a crucial tool for empowerment on the West Side. Two schools in particular, Mack School and Jones School, were the primary schools that educated and created space for black children. These environments curated a culture that encouraged the younger generation to exceed their elders, to go beyond what was expected by society. The West Side birthed out a new movement, a movement that would produce trailblazers and leaders who broke barriers.
Why should the world be overwise in counting all our tears and sighs? Nay, let them only see us while we wear the mask. We smile, but oh great Christ, our cries to thee from tortured souls arise. We sing, but oh the clay is vile beneath our feet and long the mile. But let the world dream otherwise. We wear the mask.
I have such a wonderful feeling about the Dunbar Center because we were not allowed to go to the YMCA or the YWCA at that time. You never felt welcome there. And so the Dunbar Center really became a real wonderful haven for us. And I see old pictures now of people that went there that were older than me and the ones that came up after me. But for me, there was always that comfort level.
The Dunbar Community Center played a big part in my life and in a lot of our lives, because this is where we came for activities. We were told from the beginning that it was named after Paul Dunbar, who was a poet. Not from Ann Arbor, but they named it after Paul Dunbar, who was a Black man. So that gave us pride, because we didn't get a lot of learning about Black people other than slavery. The Dunbar didn't teach it either. They didn't teach us cultural things, but we did cultural things here. This was where you could have your parties and you could have your Halloween parties, you could have your whatever functions that Black people would have, they would have here.
The Dunbar Center played a big role in the Black community in Ann Arbor. First of all, it was one of the first few meeting places for the Elks, so that ties the Elks in with the Dunbar Center. But they also sponsored events that the Elks helped them sponsor. The Dunbar Center created cultural pride because it was a gathering place, a meeting place, a place where you could go and not be harassed by the police or anybody that's behaving negative. It was a place to go to be a positive influence and learn how to become a positive influence.
The Dunbar Center was the activity center of the community, and I know my dad would come and on the weekends and meet with folks. It certainly was an important place in the community. I do know that my dad met Mrs. Rumsey at the Dunbar Center and a number of other people who worked very closely with him in trying to create change in the community. I'm sure the first place they met.
The first thing you would do is have to do your homework or get help, whatever you needed help in, tutoring or whatever. And then there's a basement, and it wasn't fixed up. It was just a plain basement. It had a pool table in it and a ping pong table. So the girls played ping pong. The girls and boys played ping pong, and the boys had pool tournaments.
And the center was so I can't give the center enough praise, because they would catch it and they would help. We've got a lot of children came up through, including Willis Patterson, my sister Gwendolyn Baker. Those come to my mind, and we have a lot of talented people who've gone through the school, gone on to college, become professors, doctors, whatever, lawyers, and our ministers, Reverend C.W. Carpenter. When I was a child, I can't remember all the ministers at Bethel AME Church, but I do remember Lyman S. Parks and the councilman, Mr. Russell Howard, and back in the day, and all these folks. And then our committee, our Boy Scout committee, were a group of fathers that helped us, and they understood. We had carpenters, we had people in the trades who recognized that we weren't getting what we should have gotten from just Jones School in the elementary school. And I think that was the catalyst for so many of our young folks or people that come up through Ann Arbor to be successful. That was very, very uplifting to a young child, because if you take a child and you're down on him from start, he's doomed, and we need somebody to lift him up. And this place right here, I can't give it enough. Dunbar Center was really that stepping stone.
And that went on until they finished the community center, which was built in 1957. Mr. and Mrs. Harrison had a house there next door, and Mr. and Mrs. Reese, and they gave up their homes for 50 cents, their land, so they could use that property to be part of the community center.
The West Side used the Ann Arbor Community Center in a way that it was important, and it was a haven because they now had their own place to go.
Because we gathered here, and you could call this our haven, because we felt safe here. You couldn't go to, in my day, you couldn't go to the Y dances. So we had our dances here on Friday night.
Well, the West Side was definitely home for the Black families in the community, and it's where everything happened. The churches were critically important in the neighborhood. They were meeting places and places where people felt welcome and comfortable. And I imagine for people who lived in the neighborhood, the Dunbar Center was very much the same thing. It was the place where they grew up for activities. It was home. I mean,
the Dunbar community, after it moved over to Main Street, still remained a wonderful haven for people who lived on the West Side. And of course, the West Side had its way of also being a haven and reaching out to be sure that people who were in that area always had a helping hand and a way to utilize their life and to grow and to be lifted by other people on the West Side.
Living in this area shaped my entire life. It made me learn how to be a giver, not a taker. Work hard in my community, give back when I can. It shaped my way of thinking and the way I raised my children, to promote legacy to them, to be proud of who you are and where you come from, and just be the best human being that you can possibly be, because I was raised by all of them and they were all good human beings. And I'm very happy to have been raised in the neighborhood that I was raised in.
The strength of the West Side was evident in its success and the many achievements of its residents. East Ann Street, in particular, became a hub for Black businesses, serving as the heart of the West Side's economic and social life. For many African Americans in the city, this area was not just a place to live, but a foundation of opportunity and growth. Many of Ann Arbor's most notable African American firsts were residents from the West Side, whose achievements reflected the spirit of the community. This environment fostered on the West Side, rooted in perseverance, integrity, and accountability, allowed its residents to push beyond societal limitations. From Albert Wheeler, who became the first Black mayor of Ann Arbor, to Nancy Francis, the city's first Black judge, these trailblazers demonstrated what was possible when a community was built on shared values and collective strength. Every heroic story has moments of triumph and tests of endurance. The journey was no different for the West Side. Among the milestones and breakthroughs, new challenges loomed and external pressures closed in, threatening the stability of the community they built.
The West Side was a place that had a number of people who grew and offered leadership in the community. I don't think people just were saying, I'm going to be a leader. It's just that when things were called for, like with Al Wheeler.
Dr. Wheeler was our first and only black mayor. There's a lot of controversy about him being the black mayor, but he made it. They wanted a recount and all of that because they just couldn't believe he won. And he was instrumental in getting Lansky Junkyard moved from the black community down here.
My dad was the first black professor at the U of M. My father was very active in civil rights and politics, and the university kept telling him to stop rocking the boat, and he would get his promotions. But he decided it was more important to rock the boat and change the community so that there was greater opportunity for his and other people's kids.
Growing up, I had relatives in the community that had their own businesses, so I was able to look at people and see what it was like to be a business person, like Russell Calvert. Mr. Russell Calvert, he owned his own rubbish company with huge, the huge dumpsters that you see all over town with Calverts on them. That's Mr. Russell Calvert. And then I had a cousin who owned his own TV repair shop. His name was Don Newman.
We had a TV gentleman who was a professional TV business, Mr. Don Newman. He was very instrumental in looking up to a person who's doing things. It's called Don's TV. People probably have forgotten about Don's TV. Well, 1960, 61, my brother Don Calvert was the first African-American fireman in this city. Even in school, my sister was the first black cheerleader on the Ann Arbor Pioneer, or back then it was Ann Arbor High School. My cousin Betty Rush, I do believe, was one of the first lending officers in the banking industry in this city.
Charlie and Ruby Baker lived right across the street from Bethel on 4th Ave. Their house was just bought this past summer. Mr. Baker and his partner had a foundry up on Jones, which is off of Broadway. It's and that's where Avalon has its offices right now. So I have said to the new director, do you know you're in a historical place? It's a historical building. And so I think it needs to be acknowledged because that's where they made the manhole covers for the city, Mr. Baker and his partner. And Mr. Baker made it his duty to hire the fellows that went to high school to work in the foundry so he would give them a job. Mrs. Baker was very active in Bethel AME Church. Mr. Baker wasn't active, but of course he put his money into the church, which helped us to build the new church, which is up on John A. Woods Drive.
Brian Westfield, who led many young girls to college on track scholarships in the Olympics. J.D. Hall, who was like the first black owner of a building downtown. His barbershop when I was a kid, loving going there and, getting all the wisdom from the old guys in the barbershop.
Dolores and Jim Turner, who are teachers, and they grew up here. Dolores was a Preston. Jim was she married Jim Turner. We were glad to have them as school teachers because even though blacks would go to school, Ann Arbor public schools didn't hire a lot of blacks. So we did some protesting with the school board and told them we needed more black administrators and teachers. And so we were successful in getting more black teachers, a few more. We did have Mr. Ellis. Mr. Ellis was one of our first. Mr. Miles was the first teacher at Jones School.
The first black teachers in the Ann Arbor public school system were the Miles, Harry Mile and Joetta Mile. And it was good for kids to see those individuals excelling Yeah, because it gave us the confidence to know that we too could do that. My sister Nancy was the first black judge, and that was in the 80s. So, it took the city a long time to get to a point where they felt comfortable electing black people to be their representatives. And my election to the Michigan Senate was the first black elected official to state government from the city in Washtenaw County. But I remember as I ran for the Senate, my dad said, this community likes to project that it's liberal and progressive, but you will find that it has an awful lot of people who are reactionary and not supportive. He was trying to talk me out of running because he didn't want me to get hurt.
There were many prominent people that were from the West Side and all over it. At one point in Ann Arbor, all the people that belonged to the lodge, the Victor C. Turners, the Judge S.J. Eldon, the Fred McDonalds, John Bellows Sr., James Crawford, Richard Jones, Horace Hawkins. Most of these people all worked right here in Ann Arbor, either for the city, and they utilized their positions with the city in order to get other people jobs. So,
where you could actually own property or rent property, Ann Street was Ann Street, and that's where a lot of businesses went to.
Ann Street was the black business district because you had the bars and there was a restaurant, the saddle shop, and then you had the around the corner on 4th Ave, you had the barber shops and the beauty shops.
And then on the corner of Main and Ann was a Kroger store. That was our local grocery store.
They also had a couple bars on Ann Street. So as children, we weren't allowed on Ann Street. So I didn't get to go there till I got grown. But it was the place to go. And from there, you went to the Black Elks. So that was our other place. At the Black Elks, you started on Thursday. You could go down there and play. You could always get a meal, go there and eat. You started on Thursday, go down to the Elks. Friday and Saturday was the night. We would have music and dance. That's where we went to dance. Now that's where after you left either Ann Street or the Elks, then you went to DeLong's to get your whatever you was gonna get, your barbecue sandwich or fish sandwich and if you've talked to other people, they talk about the sauce. Someone called me up asking me, could I get the recipe from the daughter or the grandchildren? I said, don't nobody know the recipe but DeLong and Adeline, and they are gone. Even their daughter don't know the recipe.
Anybody growing up in the early or late 60s knew there were only so many places in Ann Arbor a black individual could go. So the Elks, which was founded in 1898, and this lodge here, the Ann Arbor Elks, was founded in 1923. It was the 322nd lodge chartered into the Elks. And they basically bounced around. They met at Dunbar Center. They met at Community Center. They met at the Sportsman's Club. And in about 1948, they ran into a deal where they became given an offer to start meeting up here at 220 Sunset. So basically 1948 is when they started with this building. They started under the name Pratt Lodge, and then later changed over, I can't remember the exact date, to James L. Crawford, who was one of the exalted rulers that had been here for 40-something years. There's 100 and something departments within the Elks. They got an eyeglass department where people donate all old eyeglasses and they send them to the optometrist. And when people can't afford glasses, the optometrist finds them a pair that meets their prescription. They got a shoe. Of course, they ain't taking any old kind of shoe now. There's a shoe department. I got my past grand exalted ruler honors under the special people where they had a kid each year that had a special need, and they would bring him and let him ride in a vehicle in the parade, and they would take care of him from 8, 9, all the way up to 18. And every Christmas, he'd get a little gift and token. And but there's so many different. There's a cancer department where people that have survived cancer, they raise money and give it to people. There's a kidney foundation. We used to give money every year to the kidney foundation for people that can't afford their own dialysis or to help them out. My wife just started a lupus department because her oldest daughter got lupus. And so she started a lupus awareness department. The Elks has many departments in which you can come in and help contribute. There's an education department where you can come in and learn and work with kids. Only thing we get limited by is our space. If we had more space, we could do more events.
Having a community as strong as the community we had, all of those factors played into the pioneering of Ann Arbor, because you need help from all directions.
Just it's hard to look back at our community then and see what it is now, and just not have what we had back there.
These are places that you could go to and really feel at home and comfortable. A lot of people thought that this was a negative place to be, even though it was businesses that were owned by men who understood business and really helped other people by giving them a hand or a lift if they needed a job while they were moving to some other area or getting into other areas.
These people made the people under them want to do better. As you look on and look up to other people and the people who were in business or in professions, I think that was the thing that strived a lot of my peers and myself to try to do better.
The French Dukes were also an organization that started when one of our gentlemen came home, and he thought he just got out of the Army, and he thought it would be nice to start a marching group. And they practiced up on the market, and everybody would be up on the market to watch them drill because they were such an innovative group, and they marched in all the parades.
My name is Larry Young, lifetime resident here in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Born and raised here all my life. I grew up here. This is my grandmother's house here on Beach Street. I am a member of the French Dukes, original French Dukes. I joined when I was 14 years old. Honored and proud to be a part of the French Dukes. I remember when I was a kid, my mother took me to a parade and I seen the French Dukes come down the street, and all the excitement and all the glamour, and everyone was following the French Dukes. It was really intriguing. And being a little kid, I was kind of intimidated because I thought it was like an army coming through, because the roar and the thunder of the boots and everything. So it really was something that stuck with me, stayed in my heart. And then when I became 14 and was able to join the French Dukes, I was honored to be a part of that. Behind you too. Yeah. Is that like saying they the tallest? Time, hit it. Now I am in the position of trying to carry that legacy on with these young kids. I always had it in my heart that the youth is our future, and that we need to pass along what God had blessed us with. So I'm just trying to move forward and just do what God had given me the grant to do.
I'm Jimmy Yates. I'm one of the French Dukes who grew up in this neighborhood. If I may say, we're standing in front of the Dunbar Center, which is where most of the adults got an education, could come and be themselves. I was, like I say, one of the French Dukes, maybe a third generation. I used to watch them drilling right here at the farmers market. And like I say, it was a really great time because we didn't have much going for ourselves back then. So this was a better alternative than running the streets, being in a gang or something like that. It was organized, disciplined, strict camaraderie. The best word I can say, it was camaraderie, because everybody came together. There weren't no, cliques or anything. We were all French Dukes. For years, the black community carved out homes, spaces, and futures in Ann Arbor, withstanding much, but they couldn't withstand the quiet forces of gentrification, rising property costs, and discriminatory practices. Opportunities for black homeownership were scarce, as de facto redlining and lending discrimination made securing loans nearly impossible. Community institutions were impacted, including Jones School, the cornerstone of education for many black families, which eventually closed. Coupled with exclusionary zoning laws, black families were funneled out of the city, not by choice, but by force. With property values rising, denied loans to African Americans, and restricted covenants barring black families from home ownership in the community, society reinforced the cycle of exclusion. With little to no access to home ownership and limited housing options, where were they left to go? Forced out by a combination of financial and legal pressures, black families were displaced, moving to surrounding areas that lacked the resources and community support they had built in Ann Arbor. What once was a thriving community on the west side slowly dissipated, leaving behind a fragmented legacy. Although much of the West Side's black community was displaced, their legacy still remains in the stories passed down through generations.
As Ann Arbor started to integrate, I think the real estate market really made a conscious decision that they could also benefit from it. And so they had other ways of trying to get people in the areas that had formerly been African American.
There was tremendous pressure on people to sell their houses as more and more white families moved in.
The demographics started to change a little bit. You started having more and more people move in that didn't look like us. It was different because the sense of community just disappeared over about a 15, 20-year period.
And to get back to Jones School, when it was desegregated in 1965, it just wasn't done properly because they didn't prepare the teachers for the receiving the black kids, and they didn't prepare the students. So there was a lot of fighting that went on.
They began to phase out Jones School. And so anybody that was going into like Head Start or kindergarten got transferred over to Pittsfield. We were there for approximately 2 weeks before the white kids came in and said that they were no longer allowed to play with us. That was pretty traumatizing. But at the same time, I gained the experience of learning how to deal with people other than the black people in which lived in my community.
Integration had its positives for the community and it had its negatives. I can remember my mom very often saying, I think integration is going to be a real blow to the Black community because we have cohesion. We have, in our Black schools, we have teachers who really care about the kids and whether they learn and make progress and are prepared for a future. Kids would arrive at Ann Arbor High School not as prepared for the college prep track. They were steered into the business and skills area of the curriculum. I can remember Leroy Cappert as a principal of one of the schools that was going to receive students from Jones School being very careful about how he prepared his teachers and talked about the sensitivity that they had to show and feel for these kids who were coming into the school. Integration, again, had its very positives for the community, but it also had the downside of breaking up a very cohesive unit. As Black families tried to find houses in new neighborhoods, they would come across the restrictive covenants that were written into a neighborhood agreement.
Brook Street was the color line. I grew up on Brooks and Hiscock with my grandparents. I grew up on Gott, but I also had a home that I could go to on Brooks. And this is what my grandparents and other Black people experienced when coming to Ann Arbor. And these are still in deeds now. There's a program called Justice in Deed right now where they're trying to document and all of these restrictive covenants and deeds. New homeowners can have them removed, but they still exist in 2024 in deeds when you purchase home. And being a realtor, I read and I look through these and I try and find them sometimes. And I came up with this one, which is right in the neighborhood and on the street that I grew up in. And it says, no persons of any race other than the Caucasian race shall use or occupy any building or any lot except that this covenant shall not prevent occupancy by domestic servants of a different race or domiciled with an owner or tenant. It really hurts to read it sometimes to see how people could be so cruel to keep Black people, Jewish people, or people that they didn't deem to be worthy of living in their neighborhood.
There's an organization, Justice Indeed. I actually happen to be a very new board member. So far, we've learned that the West Side was littered with these racially restricted covenants. So basically, if you were not a part of the Caucasian race, you couldn't live there, or largely Black people were restricted from living in these homes. And what I think about when I think about racially restricted covenants is oftentimes homes are passed down to their loved ones, right? Generationally, homes are passed down. So if a Black family was restricted from living or purchasing a home, then who do you think the home was passed down to? So in my mind, when I think about racial restricted covenants, I think about how it contributed to the generational wealth gap that Black families experience.
I've had, clients that I've dealt with that are elderly, and I know that they were being taken advantage of. And then you see somebody come by their house and they knock it down and they turn around and make 3 times what they paid for it, or, they're able to then pass down some generational wealth to their family. But I know a family that I've been knowing for 50 years that just lost some generational wealth.
And in working on the Fair Housing Ordinance, the people who created that ordinance were careful to address the restrictive covenants. But the state Supreme Court ruled that restrictive covenants were unconstitutional. The state constitution of 1963 wrote in the civil rights laws that you couldn't have discriminatory practices in housing, employment, education.
The Fair Housing Act of 1968 did a great job of providing a safe space for all people to be able to move wherever they want and live however they choose to. But you still have areas where, people don't want people of color or people that are not like them in their neighborhoods, and they find ways to keep people out or push them somewhere else.
But that's why you don't see a lot of Black people, because the public housing sites are kind of on the outside, like over on Pittsfield and on the east side. And you just don't see us because we don't have a neighborhood anymore.
Redlining was definitely a practice here in the city of Ann Arbor, as demonstrated by the neighborhoods that Black families were consigned to. And it was incredibly difficult to get out of. My parents couldn't have moved out of the Black neighborhood had they not been able to get a loan from my maternal grandma.
My family left the West Side, this area, because of urban renewal and because the house was taken by eminent domain. They were going to put a Packard Beeks bypass. Where those 3 houses were on West Kingsley just stayed empty until a few years ago when they put a $1 million condo there. And at that time, also came in urban renewal and also came in public housing.
The creation of public housing also started moving Blacks out. And everybody wanted to pay less money so they had more money in their pocket. And they started moving out of houses and going into city housing.
But I think from growing up here, I'm 82, so I've been here 82 years. It's a way of removing us. It's sending a message in my mind that we're not welcome here. And even though I think our parents didn't feel that welcomed, but because we had a community, we didn't care about that. Now that we don't have the community has been broken up, you can't find us if you don't know where we are.
A lot of people, as I said, moved out, and they moved in. They started a little program called entertainment, on the weekends, and adopted the name Water Hill here in this West Side area. And then housing went sky high just because of a name and the fact that a person played the trumpet on the front porch was not necessarily a reason for them to start gouging people for homes that people had lived in all these years. I have very strong feelings about the history of Water Hill.
I can remember specifically when I noticed that the West Side was changing, not only like demographically, but economically. I remember we had this event in our neighborhood called the Water Hill Music Festival. It was a very predominantly white event that was going on, and there were a lot of incidents of our longtime Black residents getting the cops called on them, and it kind of like highlighted the change in my community. I started to look around, and I kind of noticed that I didn't see me anymore. I didn't see me at all, honestly. I only saw me and my sister and my brother. And a lot of families had moved out of our neighborhood. Our neighbors across the street had been gone for a few years. Our whole block that used to be Black was now white, and houses were being knocked down, and many mansions were being built. A lot of the houses on Gott Street no longer look like what they looked like before.
I lived in the Old West Side for about 5 years when I was a kid, from 1983 to around 1987, 1988. Um, Around that time is when we moved from the Old West Side. I was a kid, so I obviously didn't understand, housing rates and redlining and gentrification. I didn't know what any of that stuff was, but I was a product of it. My family moved to Pittsfield Village. At the time, it was Section 8 housing. Great neighborhood. Had a lot of fun living there. Met a lot of my best friends living in Pittsfield. But I got to get a little sense of what it was like to be pushed out from that experience. And then moving forward, we lived in Pittsfield for about 6 years until 1994. And the same thing happened again. We ended up moving further east from Packard. Pittsfield is on Packard, so we moved further east from Packard to Carpenter Road, which is the border of Ann Arbor and Ypsi. Ended up living in Ridgewood Apartments for my high school days. For all of high school, we lived in Ridgewood. And yeah, I started to get the sense of how Ann Arbor was treating its less economically advantaged people, i.e. Black people, and just moving further and further east towards Ypsilanti. And I'm still experiencing it.
Occasionally, I walk back through the neighborhood to see how much has changed. And as I'm doing so, sometimes they get this little computer program that they got, and it'll pop up. There's a suspicious black man walking through the neighborhood. And then somebody else will look at and be like, sorry, but that's Greg. He used to live here for over 40 years. And, David Malcolm, his nephew or somebody was pushing a lawnmower and somebody thought he stole it, just because it was a black kid pushing a lawnmower through the neighborhood. It's the neighborhood has changed. And usually it's not the ones that have been here for a long time. It's the one that have been here just 1-2 years, don't know what the neighborhood used to be like.
To address the injustices and missteps of the past, Ann Arbor has made strides toward rectifying one of the most critical issues that has impacted so many: housing. Affordable housing remains a key focus in Ann Arbor, and one of the latest efforts is the construction of the Dunbar Towers, named in honor of the former Dunbar Community Center. Spearheaded by Ann Arbor Housing Commission, this project aims to provide low-cost housing for low-income residents, individuals experiencing homelessness, and local artists who qualify. But Dunbar Towers is more than just a housing complex. It will offer resources for rehabilitation and stability, reflecting a commitment to the genuine development of the community, because housing is not a privilege, it's a right.
I'm choked up a little bit because I realize that without the Ann Arbor community voting on the affordable housing millage, the Dunbar Center may not exist. And so I'm so very happy that our community recognized that the community needed the assistance. We needed that millage to pass so that we can continue. We could starting with the Dunbar Center. We can continue on with other affordable housing opportunities to an area where that was our area previously. And when you talk to people that are brand new to Ann Arbor, they have not even that new, that have been here for years. They are shocked to learn that this was an area that was filled with vibrancy, Black excellence, Black-owned businesses.
People in the community that white people discarded or diminished because they didn't have a college education or they weren't as well spoken as white folks. But those were the people who had ideas of how to come together and fight for a better community, a better path for their kids. I watched those folks come together and build a movement that changed the city of Ann Arbor. It was dramatic. It was democracy at work. It was the very important cohesion of the Black community that changed the city of Ann Arbor. And I think if that's what Dunbar Tower commemorates and recognizes, then Dunbar Tower is a great structure.
We built this city literally with our hands. And I want people from my neighborhood to be remembered. There's been an erasure of what we've contributed. The name of our neighborhood has been changed. Our houses are being knocked down and torn down and rebuilt. So many people have been taxed out, have been priced out. If I sell my house, I couldn't afford to buy it again anytime soon. You know, my kids can't afford to buy in the neighborhood that they grew up in. I love my access to downtown. I love my access to public transportation if I want to. I love my access to nightlife, you know, like I've always had in my life, to be able to go downtown and do what I want to do. But that trip between my house and downtown is different now.
I think it's very important to commemorate the Black community and its history, because we need something to leave for our children and our grandchildren. There's history, but everybody doesn't know how to get that history. It's in the library or in the Bentley. My hope is that we will have pictures and art and history from the Black community in that Dunbar Tower, so that there will be a actual visual place young people or anybody can go, but especially our young people can go, or we can even take our grandchildren and great-grandchildren to let them know that we were here, and that your grandparents or your great-grandparents contributed in some kind of way.
There was a long time there where I know a lot of the people who still currently live in this community felt like they don't belong, even though they've lived here longer than anybody else have lived here before Carytown, before what they were calling Water Hill. Our history is important. Our history matters. And we helped, build and develop this community. And we don't want that to be erased. We don't want that to be forgotten. So I think it's important that we remember our history, but we also develop something that people feel comfortable coming back to. So I think that's a big part of what the Dunbar Tower is going to represent, a place where not only we remember and memorialize and give the history, but also moving forward, it's a safe space where all people are welcome, especially the people that feel like this was a part of their history. They need to come back to something and feel comfortable there.
I think the Dunbar Tower will have a wonderful impact on the community. I am so excited to see us get back to being together, doing community events, just like fellowshipping. And I really want to see the kids invested in, and a space where they can be loved on and cherished and motivated and taught. I hope that future generations see that they come from kings and queens and strong people and love and food and happiness. Like, we come from greatness, and I want them to see that, and I want them to carry that on.
I hope that it provides the opportunity for Black people to live in a space that once welcomed them, where they once resided, where they I mean, where they went to church, where they went to school, where they supported one another, where they broke bread together, where they, went and got their hair done or got their hair cut at Rosie's Barber or down the street at Rush's or at Hall's. These are places and remnants of the past that have been erased largely. And to me, the Dunbar Center is the start of what I hope that continues, and a place where people that look like me should feel welcome and supported.
Shirley Chisholm once said, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. And that quote encapsulates the attitude of the West Side. The strength and determination of the community not only brought about change, but laid the groundwork for future generations. Just as the West Side was more than houses and buildings, projects like the Dunbar Tower are also more than buildings. These are promises to carry out the values of integrity, perseverance, and the community that the West Side embodied. They represent Ann Arbor's vision of a more sustainable future. As we honor the West Side's legacy, let this stand as a testament. This is an acknowledgement of the past, commitment to the present, and vision for the future. This is a letter to the West Side.
A long time since I've been in this building. Okay, been a long time. Pre-1960. So this is going to be a treat for myself. The many years it's been since I've been in here. Wow, this used to be Mr. Wims's office back in the day. Back there was a kitchen, but this was office space for the director of the Dunbar Center. What a change. As you left this room, dining room here, there was a kitchen to the left here, and somewhere in this area there was a stairs that took us to the basement. Okay, this stairway used to be 10 feet that way, and it went straight down. And this stairway here, they've changed it around. You went straight up when you came in the front entrance. You came in, and the stairway was a kind of a right step, and then straight up to go up to the next level. So they've completely revamped that. Club meeting, which was co-ed. Most of our club meetings were co-ed back then because they tried, our older folks tried to promote the thought process of trying to better yourself. And of course, living in a segregated or a racist country, they knew what we needed to have to survive and try to be successful. And they preached, try to be successful, and that was ingrained even from home. But all the families, everybody converged on this place.
Came here after school. This was our community center. We come here first, do our homework, and then go downstairs and have recreation. And on Friday nights, we had dances. We had dances here because we couldn't go to the YMCA dances. Now, this door wasn't here. We came in from the front steps. That's how we entered in here. We didn't come in through this way. So this is something new for me. All of this is new. Wow. Hi, how you doing? Okay. Wow. This is all different. Because we had this was where we danced. This was all open. And we had a library. The library was.
We can go around. So.
This is all different. It's so cut up. I don't know. This is all open. I think Mrs. Ellis and Mr. Williams. Mr. Williams was the director, and Mrs. Ellis was the assistant, his assistant. Their offices were up there. We had this part in the downstairs. Now the downstairs, there was a pool table and a ping pong table. The girls played ping pong and the boys played pool. And we outgrew it. So that's when Miss Taubman of the Dunbar Center knew Mr. Williams. They were friends. So she is the one that donated money. And a couple Black families donated their homes because they lived right there where the center is. And they gave their homes up for 50 cents so that a community center could be built so that we could have a bigger place. And that was around 1957. So that's been a while ago.
Oh, man. How do you feel being back in here after so many years?
Well, it just looks different, so different. I'm glad that you're doing this here because I've been wondering what it looks like in here. I've been wanting to come up in here. But so it's nice to be able to come and see it.